This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which has links to my social media, my photography website, all the other podcasts I've done. And you can also contact me there if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, anything like that at hikingbob.com. And you can also help support this podcast at Patreon, patreon.com/hikingbob, and help support this podcast, help me pay the bills. And depending on your level of participation, you can also get rewarded for being a supporter of the podcast. So I'd appreciate that. Today, my guest is the director of the Colorado Springs Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Services Department, Britt, and we're going to talk about the accomplishments of the Parks Department and what's ahead for this year. Hi, Britt.
Hi.
Thanks for being here today.
It's always a pleasure.
I'm glad you think so.
Let's keep it that way.
I don't make it 60 minutes. We all know that this is always a friendly thing. But anyway, so 2023 was an interesting year for the Parks Department, and 2024 promises to be no less interesting. So I guess the best way to do this is like we've done in the past when I've done these, is talk about what were the big accomplishments that you see for your department in the last year.
Well, the highlight of last year for me, because I'm a little bit particular to TOPS, our Trails, Open Space, and Parks program, is that the voters of the city of Colorado Springs chose to extend that program, which is critical to our success, for another 20 years. And they did that by a vote of 78% in favor of it. So we know that TOPS is well loved and appreciated, and the voters have spoken. And that gives us the capacity to really plan ahead and know that with security that we can continue to purchase open space and provide trails and to work on our parks for our communities. So I would say that's the biggest highlight for sure. There were a lot of other really great things that happened, though.
Great. And there was a small change made to that tour and that vote, too. You want to talk about how that change affects the TOPS program?
Certainly. As any program that helps to purchase open space matures, it comes a point where people start to ask, have you purchased all the open space that you ought to have purchased, and now how are you going to take care of it? And of course, one of my big themes as the director of this department is taking care of what we have. I think it's irresponsible to acquire property without making sure that we can take care of it. And so in the open space category of TOPS spending, and maybe I should just kind of explain a little bit that the TOPS program has always been tilted in favor of open space acquisition and stewardship. So even the original ballot measure really focused on that as the big capacity. So it allocates 3% for administration, it allocates 6% for stewardship and maintenance, and then the remaining 91% of that tax is divided by a maximum can be spent on, of 20% can be spent on parks, a maximum of 20% can be spent on trails, and then the 60% that remains goes to open space. So we know that that's the legislative intent. This time around, in order to reach a compromise about taking care of the things that we have, but still being able to pursue the acquisitions that remain outstanding, a compromise was made where in that open space spending, we committed to 75% for acquisitions and 25% for taking care of those acquisitions. So that's the change that was made in the open space category. And then in the trails category, the voters also approved allowing trails to be benefited by TOPS revenues, regardless of whether they were acquired with TOPS money or not. And we know that when you're going down the trail, you don't want it to stop suddenly because TOPS wasn't involved in its original acquisition. It just makes sense for trails to be able to just keep going.
Yeah, it was always kind of silly when people say, how come the trail ends? It becomes, less nice than the other trail, and then all of a sudden it's nice again. It's like, well, this purchase, you try to explain to people, and to those of us involved in it, it made sense, but obviously to the public, it didn't. So this kind of is going to eat the grand, I think we can refer to it as a great equalizer, I guess would be the way to call it.
Sure. I mean, we had some parks that were kind of like that too. If anybody is familiar with Ute Valley Park, half of it was originally a regional park and half of it was purchased with TOPS funds, and we were always super careful about that division. But it didn't make sense to our users that half of the park could have a parking lot that was fine and the other had a pitted parking lot full of potholes. And so I think it was a really nice compromise that recognized the basis for TOPS, but also gave us that flexibility to really give our community a seamless trail system and a seamless open space system.
And as you said, the vote was overwhelmingly in favor of it. I mean, I think at one point we just touched 80%. It ended up being 78%. That's fine. That's an overwhelming number of people supporting it. So it's a good direction for the future. And we're good for 20 years from 2025 because that's when it originally was set to expire.
Correct. So it goes until December 31st of 2045.
Perfect. That's a long time to be doing a lot of good work here in town.
And looking back on the TOPS program, some of our most treasured spaces were made possible through that. So we know that it's very important to our city and to our region.
Sure. Places like Red Rock Canyon, Stratton Open Space, Blue Stem Prairie, all those places were Corral Bluffs.
Cheyenne Mountain State Park.
Most of Cheyenne Mountain State Park, are all places that were purchased with that money. Well, that's great. So TOPS aside, what were the other cool things that the Parks Department did this past year?
Well, one of the things that we got to do was to work through an election cycle that brought us new leadership. And it extended through June of last year. So we were really working on achieving new council members at the same time as the TOPS vote. And then also we had a mayoral runoff and we have new mayoral leadership. And so during that time, what was positive for parks is that we got to come together as a team and really identify a transition plan for new leadership to understand what it is that we do, where are our strengths, where are our weaknesses, and to educate a lot of folks, not just our new leadership, about the benefits of parks, recreation, and cultural services. So I thought that was huge.
So how do you perceive that the transition went from a previous administration that was, I think it's fair to say, was fairly pro parks to the current administration? I know that's a touchy subject, but was at least the transition pretty seamless? Does it appear that the incoming council people and mayor were already pretty well educated on parks? Did you have to spend a lot of time, telling them about the department, or did they come in here pretty much knowing already what you're doing here?
Well, I think through the campaign season, they got a lot of questions from our parks public who all care very much about parks and want to make sure that parks are adequately funded and that we have these beautiful spaces available for our community. So they'd been already asked and put on the spot about a lot of these questions. And I would say that Mayor Yemi and his team and the new council members have all really embraced parks in general. But with all things, it's so much more complicated once you get into the details. And so there is still a lot to provide in terms of education. And I would say that the only real change that I've seen is a different lens. So our new mayor, Yemi, has gone on listening tours with the public, and parks came up a lot. And thank you to all of our parks supporters for making sure that happened. Every listening session had strong support for parks and appreciation for parks, and maybe a little pressure with regard to funding of parks. And I think that was all very, very healthy because it reinforced information that we'd provided within the department. So it was all very cohesive. I also think that economic vitality is of specific interest to our mayoral team. And so parks, we know, contribute, trails contribute, recreational services all contribute to our economic vitality. And that's an area where I've chosen to focus some energy to make sure that we've got the data that would back up that we are really contributing in ways that you don't even have to go to these places to see benefits in our economy as it relates to our facilities.
And there was that news release that the communications department put out a couple weeks ago about how the outdoor recreation industry in Colorado is like the sixth biggest in the country. and it's billions of dollars that it contributes to the statewide economy.
That's right. That was a study that was done by the National Recreation and Park Association, the NRPA, and they look at all the whole country, and what they found was that Colorado is number 6 in the whole country with $7 billion of impact from parks and recreation. But we also had done a study because of this interest that I have and the partnership with the Garden of the Gods Foundation just to look at Garden of the Gods Park alone. And what we found with a local economist who's very, very good at this, Tatiana Bailey, is that the Garden of the Gods by itself contributes $272 million to the Colorado Springs and Pikes Peak region. So this year, going forward, I would like to look at the rest of our park system and to update a study that we had done with the help of Trust for Public Land to look at all of our facilities and understand the impact that they contribute. So that is something for 2024 that I will be doing.
Okay. And do you think that study will be useful in freeing up some more money to maybe improve some of those parks if you find that a lot of people are visiting them, but maybe the facilities haven't quite caught up? We all know about the Jacob study going back years and the hundreds of millions of dollars that it identified as needs. You think that will help in maybe freeing up a little bit more money to get more things improved?
We've been looking at different avenues for increased parks funding, and certainly the economic impact of our parks and trails and open spaces contributes to a good conversation about many different park funding initiatives, one of which could be looking at the tourism tax, which is very, very low in this city, and whether that might be elevated at some point and a portion of that dedicated to parks. So that's been something that the department has been asked to look at in the past and is currently looking at now. But without data points to support it, it's hard to have that conversation. The last time that we had that report updated was in 2016. So it's really time to do it again.
It's a little long in the tooth.
Well, exactly. But what I can tell you is, spoiler alert, the study back in 2016 really showed a dynamic impact on our region, and I know that will remain true, if not more impactful now.
When I did one of these podcasts with Mary Yemi some months ago, he did identify that the tourism tax, the LART tax, was very low, and he was in favor of definitely increasing it, maybe even doubling it, and even at that, it would be far lower than most other places have. So, and when I did that podcast, people who listened to it said, well, I live in a small town, and our LART tax, their equivalent to it, was more than twice what ours is. And they're like, what are you guys doing? I'm like, I don't know. It's just way out of my control to do anything about it. But it was interesting to hear back from people who were talking about what theirs is. And little towns were like much higher than us.
Absolutely. And following through on that, Mayor Yemi has placed in his strategic initiatives for this year a focus on reform of the lodgers and automobile rental tax, which is LART, and we call it the tourism tax.
And it's more than just increasing it. It's also making some minor changes in how it's allocated and things like that. Right now it has to be kind of like, well, we want some money, so they write a check. I think they want to, there's been some discussion in different circles about maybe setting aside a percentage or a dollar amount to go to different, parks and, maybe law enforcement or public safety and things like that, that right now is not in the LART sphere.
In that ordinance, that's right. So I think that there will be a very constructive conversation with City Council and with input about that entire subject matter. And I'm not predicting what the outcome will be, but I am very happy to see that we are following through on that. And when we look at our system in particular, we do have a lot of facilities that are, we would call them tourism impacted park, recreation, and cultural services facilities, not just Garden of the Gods or Pikes Peak, America's Mountain with the Summit Visitor Center, but also all of our sports facilities where people travel from all over the state to compete. And we have a lot of training that goes on for athletics across our system. So I think there are lots of opportunities to talk about additional funding in that realm for the parks, recreation, and cultural services.
Yeah, I'm thinking Pioneers Museum, the same thing.
Clearly.
Always, they're doing a lot of great work there, but always can use, some more to preserve what they have there. I know there's a big project going on there now to kind of preserve things there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is another highlight of 2023.
There we go.
And it was on my list, certainly, is engaging in this massive restoration project for the HVAC system in the Pioneers Museum, which has been closed for most of the year. And they are in an annex property right now where they do have exhibit space. But we are looking forward to finishing that project, which was a $6.5 million project. And I can tell you that I had some sleepless nights worrying about pipes bursting and water going in bad places and exhibits and artifacts being affected. And thank goodness that we've got the support to be able to do that project from many, many places. So looking forward to a reopening in 2024.
Excellent. That's like I refer to it as kind of like the historical depository for the entire county and the entire region. And, it was the county courthouse for many, many years. So it's important to preserve the building, not only the building, but what's in there.
Absolutely. They're priceless.
Yeah.
It's a priceless history, and it really tells our story, and we have an obligation to take care of it properly.
Great. So what other interesting, cool stuff has the department done this year?
Oh, one of my favorite things is, of course, open space acquisition.
Sure.
And early in 2023, we had the fantastic opportunity to acquire, after a hard-fought struggle, we were able to get Wild Horse Ranch, which is 1,018 acres of property, all in one chunk, with a beautiful pond and a lot of really fascinating things associated with it. And that is located just south of the Corral Bluffs open space, just south of Highway 94. So really acknowledging and taking advantage of an opportunity on the east side of our city, which, of course, is a focal point as our city grows in that direction.
Yeah, land acquisition on that side have been kind of hard to come by, because that's also where development has been going. So a lot of private ownership there, and getting that into the city inventory, I guess, for lack of a better word, it's been something that's been a little difficult to do.
Well, it was definitely a good partnership with the Conservation Fund, who happened to know the property owners. And although there were a couple of times where the property went under contract to others, and we felt like perhaps we'd missed an opportunity, we were right there when those contracts fell through. And with unanimous support from the TOPS Working Committee, my thanks to TOPS, and also from Parks Board, and unanimous support from the City Council, we were able to move forward on that purchase. And I can tell you, after having seen a season with that property, that people are just going to love it. And
that one, besides being a beautiful place, and I was out there, I haven't been out there since it was purchased, but and it was pretty, it had been overgrazed. There were cattle out there. Pictures I've seen this last year with a lot of moisture. It's grown up quite a bit, that pond, and but it's a birders paradise. Birders are going to absolutely love it there with the bird population that's out there.
It's amazing to me still how resilient Mother Nature is if you allow her to recover. And this property really proved that, because when you went out to see it before we purchased it, it was in not the best of condition. Yeah. And yet, over just the course of this last summer, and I will tell you that the moisture that we received was very helpful, it was lush and green and beautiful. Mother Nature
always finds a way to come back and rejuvenate herself, and it shows in that property. Do you think with this, I'd like to call that a pretty simple purchase, pretty simple swath of land, pretty flat, not a lot of trees. Do you anticipate, because it's such a simple place to work with, that getting that open to the public may occur a little quicker than other properties which have been forested and on mountainsides and things like that have normally taken? Do you anticipate that might move a little quicker?
I see no reason why it couldn't. And, that's one of the things that you point out is that there are other properties sometimes that have complexities that need to be worked out first. A good example of that is the Black Canyon Quarry property that we purchased, but we have to go through a reclamation process with the state's Division of Mining, Reclamation, and Safety first. And we're working with our Forest Service partners and a lot of other entities before we can go into a planning phase. And this property does not offer any of those obstacles. So that's a nice thing, is to have a property that could go directly into planning. Right now, I guess what I would say is that we have a capacity issue on staff because we have had some successful acquisitions. We had successful acquisitions at the Blodgett open space, followed by Fishers Canyon open space, followed by Wild Horse. And so we've got some great properties in queue. And it's wonderful to have those just lined up and ready to go. And I think Wild Horse is definitely one that would be lined up and ready to go. I guess I should say a caveat is that Wild Horse Ranch is what the developers used as a marketing name for it. It probably won't be the final name of the property because I can tell you I've never seen a wild horse anywhere near that property.
I suggest to call it Grazing Bovine Ranch because of all the cows out there, but they're not even there anymore either. So
doesn't have a good ring to it either, does it?
Not all my ideas are great ones. That's probably one of those. So let's talk about some of these properties you mentioned here. The Blodgett Open. Let's talk about Blodgett Open Space. We're on by the time this airs, it's going to be pretty much the tail end of that master planning process before it becomes, a couple more steps before it becomes the official master plan. But tell us how that's going and what you're hearing from people about that whole idea. And that had to be remaster planned because of acquisitions of land added to it. So obviously the master plan that was there was for a small chunk of what's actually there now. So, obviously it makes sense. We're adding more property. We need to redo this. Tell us where we're at with that, and what are you hearing from the public about that whole big swath of land up there?
The story of Blodgett could take an entire podcast for sure. But, the city did have Blodgett Open Space as a property that had its own master plan. And we were lucky enough to be able to add another 67 acres to the property. So we did an interim master plan at the time to try out some of the trails that were available and to have a parking area that could accommodate folks. But we were really, really hopeful that we might be successful on a further land acquisition, which at the time we called the Pikeview Buffer Space because it was in between the Pikeview Quarry and the Oak Valley neighborhood. And luckily enough, we were able to also make that wish come true and purchase that property, which caused us to be in a position to do a wider master plan process. That kicked off last year and had really strong public participation, both on the property and in various forums and formats. We were able to use the Flying W Ranch facility to host a couple of those big public meetings and had wonderful participation and a lot of good public comment. Toward the end of that process, as we were developing really the drafts for consideration, we got a strong interest from the neighborhoods that would be affected that was very specific to trailheads and security issues and concerns about, I live really close to this and I want to make sure that this property isn't going to negatively affect all of the things that I appreciate about open space. And so what we've done is slowed that process down quite a bit because I can tell you to date, the public comment, we've received over 1,400 distinct public comments and reviews and assistance in terms of moving forward with a pretty complicated master planning process. So I appreciate that. And the other thing I really appreciate is that these citizens and community members who have been commenting, even when they have a significant concern, they've been very polite, they've been respectful, they haven't been mean to the park staff, which sometimes people are. Yeah. But not these folks. They're very adamant about their concerns, but they haven't been mean. And I think that goes such a long way in moving forward to a good solution. So what we did is we said, yep, we're going to take more time over the holidays to make sure that people really have time to look at this. we're going to make adjustments based on the concerns we've heard, and then we're going to communicate those adjustments back out. So next Monday, actually, we're going to have a meeting that's focused just on the neighborhood folks to let them know what we did in response to the concerns that we heard and see what they think about those approaches. Another thing I really liked about the Blodgett master plan process is that we had a lot of balance in the comments between making sure that wildlife concerns are addressed and that critical wildlife corridors are preserved, and then also allowing for recreational use that's compatible with the habitat. And sometimes I worry that wildlife's voice will get lost in the fervor and urgency to do recreation. And in this case, our comments were very much in favor of that balance.
And there's all manner of wildlife up there. You're right on the national forest, so there's deer and there's bears and there's mountain lions and coyotes and fox and you name it. It is in that open space up there, or it's right up against that open space. So they probably see, the neighbors who live there probably see all kinds of things there. So it makes sense that they're concerned about that. And I also am glad to hear that was a hot topic for people, that they want to preserve that. Because, like I said, sometimes we forget about these things. I imagine they even have bighorn sheep that probably come through there.
The bighorn sheep, for sure. And, it's just magical that we have this right outside of such a large metropolitan area, that people appreciate it, they value it. And our planning process, we heard that through all the comments.
Cool. So let's talk about the other big one that we purchased this past year, and that would be the Fishers Canyon open space. And a little confusion. We're not talking about Fishers Peak State Park down in Trinidad. It's unfortunate we have two places named the same thing, but that's okay. But this is Fishers Canyon open space, and it is the east, basically I like to call it the east face of Cheyenne Mountain.
Right. So if you think about the area that's kind of just north of Cheyenne Mountain State Park and the mountain backdrop that's supported with the very steep area, but also there's this beautiful meadow and a lot of coniferous trees, and it's very, very pretty, but it also provides connectivity for so many trail opportunities with the Forest Service and also Cheyenne Mountain State Park, and also our Chamberlain Trail, which would run ideally one day all the way from Cheyenne Mountain State Park up to the Air Force Academy.
Awesome. So is that, I guess that master plan project is starting this year. Is that correct?
That is correct. So last year we had the funding approved by City Council, by TOPS, by the Parks Board, to move ahead with the planning process for Fishers Canyon open space. And so as soon as we're finished with the Blodgett open space, we will roll right into Fishers. And so it's very exciting. My
friend David's not going to have any rest, is he? He's going to go from one project to another.
I think he loves it, though, so I think it's okay.
It probably is okay. There's more to the Parks Department than obviously these big, wonderful open spaces that we're having here. So what can you tell us about the other things the Parks Department do? We have numerous city parks, and we have the cultural side of things. What else is going on with the Parks Department?
Well, one of the things that we needed to do was make sure that we took care of the people that we have. We had a number of vacancies, and we were able to fill those. One of the things I'm very proud of is that we were able to hire a new manager for Garden of the Gods Park. And after a national search, one of our internal folks was able to move up into that position. And she's kind of world renowned already. She was our city archaeologist, and it's Anna Cordova. She has a fascinating background. She has a love for the land, and she is just killing it. She's doing a great job. Right. So that was a wonderful thing that we were able to do. So we also, we put our team together, Kim King, who has been with the department for 23 years, was able to be named as the assistant director. We were the only department in the city of a large size that did not have an assistant director. So I also felt like that was a strong move, and Kim has been doing wonderful work as well. Really appreciate that. So in some of those projects, there's the the side of the Parks Department that some people are not as familiar with are with our community centers and the services that we provide for athletic programming. We have the free youth soccer program, for example. And so Kim comes with all of the knowledge about those programs, and it's a really nice complement to my love for the open space and the natural areas and the wildlife pieces. She comes with vast knowledge about all of the other programming that we do.
Okay. And I would just want to go back to the politics for just a minute. In the past, we've had economic downturns, and some of the reallocation of what little funds may have been left during those economic downturns was born on the back of the Parks Department. And the Parks Department took a huge hit when those things happened. So this past year, after many years of a really robust sales tax revenue, it kind of flattened out a little bit. It wasn't terrible. Flattened out a little bit. That required some cuts in budgets. How was that? How did that work out this time around as opposed to a previous time when that had to happen?
Well, years ago, I think the Parks Department and some other departments were seen as kind of frivolous, just for fun. You could definitely get by without them, and that was not the case this time around. So this time around, the Parks Department and all other departments were asked to take a 3.43% cut. And that basically was to align with what we were seeing with our sales and use tax revenues flattening out, but inflation not flattening out. Right. It was continuing on. And so we had all these pressures on the things we have to buy anyway, on insurance for all the buildings and our vehicles and all of those common, the salary costs were all still rising, but our revenue was not. And I really appreciated the approach that our leadership took with regard to identifying those costs, because every department was asked to find their own savings and to offer those up. And so that way we could buffer against the reductions that we needed to take. And I don't think that was the approach in the past. I think the approach in the past was to really look at some core services and then try to balance it out on everything else. And this time around, it was everybody take the same cut.
And hopefully this is just a temporary measure and things pick up again. And I think there's already some signs that inflation's kind of flattening out a little bit. So hopefully this year works out a little better than the previous year.
Well, I feel like it was really responsible. But the other thing that our leadership did for us was reach into the city's reserves, because we had more reserves than required under accounting standpoints for governments. And so they did buffer those cuts pretty heavily by going into the reserves to support the year. And hopefully 2024 will show that our economy is back on the uplift, and I think we'll be in good shape. But I think our new team really did everything they could to make it as manageable as possible. And then, of course, we all did our part as well, and appreciate that City Council thought that was the way to go. And so 2024 is looking like a year that we can keep moving forward.
And I brought that up only because of two things. One of which we talked about was the study of economic impact. I think last time that happened, there was nobody really knew what the economic, I'm talking about the recession. Nobody really had a number. Nobody could figure out what it was. So parks were looked at, as you said, kind of a frivolous, well, they're nice to have, but we don't really need them. Now that there's some solid numbers that show the economic impact, when these kind of issues come around, it's more like everybody needs to be handled more equitably than in the past.
I think that's true. I may be a little bit biased about it, but certainly.
I am too.
And then the other thing is that our parks supporters were very active during the election, and they were active in the listening sessions, and I know that they kept parks top of mind. And so if any of you listening to this podcast were part of that, just know that I think it made a difference.
Absolutely. And that gets me to another topic. Was during that recession, one of the big things that took a hit was the size of the department, and I'm talking about manpower-wise. Where are we at now and compared to prior to the recession? It's funny we're talking about a recession. It's been almost 10. How many years ago? It's been a long time, and we're still talking about
2010, wasn't it?
Yeah, we're still talking about that, but it's taken forever to come back from there. How are we now compared, at least manpower-wise, to where we were before that?
So in terms of just pure numbers of staff, we have recovered back to the 2008, 2009 numbers before they were cut so heavily. So that is good news. And we're still behind in terms of percentage of general fund, but we've got the number of people back. Now, we also have more facilities and we have more open space to take care of and more members joining our community as our city grows. So there's still a lot of work to be done in that regard, but we have recovered at least the number of people that's compatible with the number back in 2008, 2009.
So at least the number of people to go out there and clean things up and maintain things is at least more like where it should be.
I really feel grateful for that support, and I know City Council and both the Mayor's office from the prior administration and this one have been supportive in terms of, within the revenues that we have and being fiscally responsible and not spending dollars in a silly way, being able to provide more impact, keeping our parks, trails, and open spaces the way that we want to offer them to our community.
Great. You talked a little bit about the community centers, which are very important, and there's been some change in how some of these community centers are run. You want to talk a little bit about how that transpired over the year? So
one of the things that we did celebrate in 2023 was 1 year of operations as we resumed operational management of the West Side Community Center, and that was something that really generated out of community support for the city to resume operations there. Previously, it was operated by an outside entity that decided that they wanted to take a different direction, and we were struggling with what's the right model for this space and for those services. And I'm really proud to say that after pretty lengthy conversations and a lot of community engagement and some people that were pretty fearful about losing the West Side Community Center, we now have it up and running. It's vibrant. It has a lot of programming. We have new staff there. And we've been able to lease out space in the different buildings that support all of those services that we think are important for the community. So that was another big win coming out of maybe a contentious situation, as we did not know exactly how that community center was going to move forward.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other facilities, like the swimming pools and stuff. I know like the one in my neighborhood is got some challenges and hasn't been able to be open for a couple of years. Where are we at with some of these other assets that we have that your department is responsible for?
Well, that was one of the chief challenges that I identified for the department, and one of the things that we highlighted with leadership and our new council members is that based on that infrastructure assessment, we had $279 million of deferred maintenance across our system, and our aquatic facilities are a wonderful example or a terrible example, depending on how you feel about it, of that struggle, which is in a situation where you've got a growing city and your revenue base is not growing. How do you take care of all of those things? And a lot of them are really either facing infrastructure challenges or end of useful life challenges, and we haven't been able to solve them. So we have had to have the Memorial Park facility closed for years and years and years because of cracking that's happened subsurface that makes that an untenable facility. You talk about your park, and I happen to know that might be Portal Park.
It is.
And again, the funny thing that some people may not know about the city of Colorado Springs is a lot of our parks and probably other places are built over abandoned coal mine tunnels, and sometimes subsidence occurs, and when that happens, the facilities on top are affected, and Portal Park is one of those, and its pool has been closed for quite some time because of that. So we've evaluated different ways to handle the aquatic facilities. We need to do some repairs even at some of our most beautiful ones, like Wilson Ranch Park has a beautiful facility, and Cottonwood also is another facility that got some upgrades. what we've done is we've taken the Jacobs assessment, or that infrastructure study, and we've broken down the most urgent needs and put them into categories. And essentially identified, if you wanted to focus on our top 5 aquatic facilities, here's what we would recommend to attack first, and this is what the cost would be. And early in the year, in 2023, we were really hopeful that there might be additional funds, and so we were ready with a slew of different opportunities. I kind of considered it as an a la carte menu. So we had a group of water conservation projects where if you could convert bluegrass into native turf, or if you could reduce the footprint of our turf, where would your savings be, and which spaces would we suggest? So we did the top 5 of those. We did the top 5 playgrounds that needed renovation and restoration. We did the top 5 aquatic facilities. We did the top 5 memorial park items. And so we just tried to put together a grouping of all the different things. If a new administration had extra money to spend, that they could spend it on parks. And I still have that because 2024 might be the year instead of 2023, where we actually had to reduce a little bit. But we are prepared, and we're taking that study and we're using it. If there's one thing I wanted to do, was to get value out of the study and not just use it as something to be sad about, but use it as a solution.
You got that? They got that in your drawer. So if the mayor comes around and says, "I got extra money," you can just pull it out and says, "Here's my list of things to do."
Well, I met with him personally, and I showed him all of those projects, and his eyes lit up, and he knows that we are ready. So I feel like that's part of the reason why Parks is focused on in the infrastructure priority that he has, and then also with regard to Parks funding.
Excellent. So there's other things that the Parks Department does. Let's talk a little bit about Pikes Peak, America's Mountain. Now, it's run as an enterprise, but it still falls underneath your department. The new visitor center has been open up there for a couple of years now. How are things going on Pikes Peak? How is the new visitor center doing? Are you seeing the Summit House, I should call it? How is it doing as far as visitorship? Are you seeing more people going up there because they want to see the new Summit House as opposed to the old dungeon and bunker that used to be up there?
Well, there's a lot to be said for the beautiful structure that's in place now, which is the Summit Visitor Center versus the concrete bunker.
Yeah.
Both facilities offer the donuts, so I think the donuts are still a huge hit, and we had to make sure that we preserve that.
And they're still wonderful. I've had some myself.
But I think there was a lot of interest in visiting the Summit and seeing the Visitor Center, and so that we had a really strong visitation to the Summit Visitor Center, and we have a wonderful manager of the Pikes Peak America's Mountain Enterprise, Skylar Rorabaugh, and he just has a lot of really great ideas. He's very collaborative, and he is a recreation enthusiast. He came from Estes Park System, so he's got a lot of ideas, and I love how he works with our partners, so I know that there will be other things to come that will reinvigorate, so it just won't be a drive to the top. You'll have stopping places in between to do more things. So I'm really proud of how the Summit Visitor Center has turned out. Obviously, in the first year of operations, there were some kinks to work out, and we're still working on a few things, but I think the interpretation up there is wonderful. And another thing to celebrate in 2023 was Indigenous Peoples Day, and the tribal representation that we were able to have as daybreak happened at the top of the summit. It was really a wonderful way to kind of embrace all of the cultures that find that space to be very significant.
Excellent. So, Britt, one of the things, the big topics that's been kind of brewing for a while is the issue of e-bikes in our parks and on our trails. And it's a complicated issue because we have these different kinds of places. We've talked a lot about TOPS properties, and that has one set of constraints. Then we have regular park property. Tell us where we are with our finally establishing an e-bike program in the city.
Well, it is more complicated than some people think it might be, and I often get questions of people say, come on, every other place, everybody's riding them. Why is Colorado Springs different? And I can say that we are truly different because we have the TOPS program, which has a restriction on motorized use. And Some people will think that the battery-powered e-bike is a motor, and it is. And other laws across the country and the state will define it as not, because they're thinking more of carburation, like with motorbikes and OHVs and all the other kinds of vehicles that run on gasoline. So it's funny because e-bikes have come along into our legal situation, and the legal situation doesn't acknowledge them, so we need to do that.
Right.
And I know that our department has worked on this in the past, and as we have kind of focused on the areas where we need to have some continuity, what we've noticed is that we have some properties with conservation easements, and those easements each need to be evaluated individually to see if they're in alignment or not in alignment with that kind of use. And then the other place where specific attention needs to be focused is on the ordinance that implements our Trails, Open Space, and Parks program. And there are such strong opinions on both sides of this issue. There are the people that really want to be able to use them, and I have to agree that I see it their way sometimes, because if you are just traveling down a concrete trail, paying attention to the jurisdictional lines between a TOPS purchased piece of trail and a regional trail, that's not on anyone's mind when they're using their bike on a trail. But I also see it strongly from the preservation side. Many of the proponents of the original TOPS ordinance were saving open space from motorbikes and dirt bikes, and they are concerned that motorized use will destroy the very thing that we've been protecting. So finding a balance and finding the right path forward is really a goal that we have, and I look forward to tackling that in 2024, beginning with a task force to identify the questions that we would ask, and then setting it out to the broader community to refine those questions. And ultimately what we've been told by our legal advisors is that we would need to go to a ballot measure, to a vote, in order to align or prohibit, whichever way we choose to go, the use of these really battery-powered or assisted bikes. And then, of course, it isn't just about bicycles. It turns out that there are all kinds of other devices that people use on trails and across our system, which are kind of similar. So we're just going to have to take a thoughtful, collaborative approach. I want all voices to be heard. I want them to all be equal. And hopefully with all the reasonable voices, we can come to a place where there's some recognition that we all want to protect our property, but we also recognize that some kind of alignment would probably be beneficial.
And my understanding is the legal department looked at the ordinance, the TOPS ordinance, and the phrase in question said no motorized vehicle. So it's, to me, and my argument has been that that's a description, not a legal definition. Like we can argue that a car is a motor vehicle and has to be licensed, but there are motorized things. And I think that's kind of where legal went, that's a description, and if it has a motor, it's a motorized vehicle, and that's kind of where they came down on. You're going to have to change that ordinance by a vote. Yeah,
it's really interesting. It says motorized use is prohibited except for parks maintenance and emergency vehicles. That kind of makes sense.
Sure.
And TOPS is unique because it wasn't suggested by the city. It was suggested by a vote of the people. And in order to change the ordinance, it needs to go back out to a vote of the people. City council can't change it on their own, and that's why we would need to do that way. Almost every other ordinance, comes from city council or it comes from the department, and it can be then changed that same way. This one came from the people and must be changed by the people.
So is your department looking to settle that issue before it comes out with an e-bike policy system-wide, or do you think you're going to maybe graduate it in like regional parks that are not affected by TOPS? You might have some policy in effect before we have the people vote on what happens in TOPS properties.
What I'd like to do is have this big community discussion.
Okay.
And really craft our path forward with the community, and then also with our leadership and city council. So it's going to be a big discussion, but I'm hoping that we can find our way forward. I'd hate to piecemeal it out. Maybe it'd be better just to have a uniform approach if we can get there.
Okay. And I guess that answers the question why other cities have done this universally. They do not have this same ordinance, and we are very, very unique. We're fortunate to have that TOPS program, but it also comes with its own series of constraints that were implemented from the very beginning, and they have to be dealt with in the right manner.
Absolutely. We have a different path to travel, but we're going to forge our way.
Okay. So do you, and I'm not going to pin you down on this, I'm not going to make this a binding thing. Do you think that by the end of the year, you may have at least a plan forward pretty solidified and moving forward from there? Do you think that would happen by the end of the year?
It's definitely our plan to do that. It's certainly up to the community, too, as they participate and help us move forward.
Okay, great. All right, with that, we'll move on to the next topic. I'm trying to think of what other stuff that you guys, the department, handles that I haven't thought about that you might want to tell us how they did during the past year.
Well, there are a couple of things where we got awards for work that we had done or submitted, and so I really wanted to highlight some of those. The Colorado Parks and Recreation Association has 2 awards that we won last year. One of was for Panorama Park, and that was the best design for a renovated park. So in all of the state of Colorado, Panorama Park was chosen. And I think rightfully so, but now it's not just me. It's outsiders who may not have known Panorama's story. But that park redesign, it was our largest renovation that we'd ever tackled with the help of Trust for Public Land, the RISE Coalition, and many, many, many others. Couldn't have done it without the coalition of support that we had and the community buy-in, which makes it a vibrant space today, but now the Colorado Park and Recreation Association recognized that as the best renovated design, so I thought that was pretty neat.
It's always good when an outsider reaffirms or affirms your opinion of it. Like, you think it's great, but then somebody else comes in and goes, no, you're right, this really is great. And it's good to have that affirmation. Especially
among your peers who all do this work themselves, and they held it up to the highest of standards, so that was cool.
And most of them probably thinking, no, my park's the best park.
Of course they would.
Cool.
And then the other was we had nominated Stephanie Finley Fortune, who is our council member, liaison to the Parks Board, who really was a community champion, and Colorado Parks and Recreation Association has a Community Champion Award. And Stephanie was really behind the community engagement to really get the West Side Community Center set and moving forward. She was a voice for parks in general. She helped us with Fishers Canyon. She really was very supportive, and unfortunately she succumbed to leukemia, I believe, in June of this year, and we had just recently lost her, and we're heartbroken, and we're able to honor her through this award. And I just feel like her spirit is with us in all of the community engagement and the support of what we do. But it was really nice to have that honor statewide for her contributions, which I think probably just lead us to be better in all of the things that we do and accepting our community's interests and needs and really lifting it up in so many different ways. So really appreciated that award as well.
Great. So I've asked you a whole bunch of questions, and we've hit on a whole bunch of topics, and I'm probably pretty sure I missed on a few things. What else do you have to tell us about that I probably didn't ask you about?
Well, I think we covered a lot of things, and there's always so much in the Parks Department. I guess the only other thing that I was thinking about that was a little bit different in 2023 is that we had a couple of opportunities for the public to purchase TOPS posters, which have been done to commemorate the 25th anniversary of TOPS, and they are beautiful.
They're gorgeous.
So we've kind of been rolling them out over time, and the first one, of course, was Stratton, because Stratton Open Space was the first purchase under the TOPS program. But then we also have a beautiful one from the other side of our city at Corral Bluffs, and the most recent one came out right before Christmas, Red Rock Canyon Open Space. Again, really nice color scheme and just looks excellent in a floating frame. So we offered those to the public and had a great response. Some people are collecting the whole set.
Yep.
And then also, in the past, we've had support from Timberline Landscaping to produce these beautiful calendars, and we have local photographers, and they all compete for the calendar contest. And in the past, we only had enough to really do things for Timberline and then also for Parks Board Council and a few people, but really not the wider public. So we offered those for sale as well, and those have done really, really well. So if you're still interested in those kinds of things, they can be found at shopcos.org.
Cool. So we've talked about what happened in the last year. What do you see coming forward this year? We kind of talked about Blodgett. The Blodgett master plan is going to be moving forward in the next couple of months. Fishers Canyon will probably start, picking up once David is done working on that one. What else do you see the big things coming up for the Parks Department in the coming year?
Well, in 2024, I know that we are working on a neighborhood park that people have waited for since 2007 called Greyhawk Park. And that's one of those where a developer is required to provide the park space, but the city parks department is the one to build it. And we have just been unable to scrape together the funds to do all of the different parks like that. However, Greyhawk is moving forward. It's in 2023. It's been going through a public planning process, a lot like Blodgett, but with the smaller participation because it is a neighborhood park. And we're about to release the final design for that park, go into construction documents, and move forward on the funding. So that's really exciting to move forward on that one. Trying to think of other things.
Do you see the neighborhood seeing at least construction starting on that this year, or you think that's still a little bit further down the road?
Just based on the time it takes to get construction documents, I've still got a funding gap that I'm about to fill. I'm got high hopes for being able to do that. But what I think would happen is we would be able to at least do a groundbreaking perhaps, but construction in 2025 is what we've been telling the community.
Oh, so there's a light at the end of the tunnel for those folks, and they've been waiting a long time.
Well, they sure have, and this park has a really unique character to it. It's got some interesting topography and Gamble Oak, and so it's going to have a natural component and a developed park component, and I really like how it kind of reflects that community, that they're going to have that in the park design.
Cool. I just thought about one other park, Coleman Park, over on also on the east side. Where are we at with the development of that park?
So Coleman Park went through a big planning process in 2022, which was funded by voter approval of a Tabor retainage. And that went along with a whole slew of other projects. And so we did finish the planning process for that park. We got the cost estimates and also need to true up some of the grading and other things that need to happen in order to make that park possible. So we're still working forward on Coleman Park, but the price tag for that one's a little different from a neighborhood park. Original estimates were around $45 million. Our annual general fund budget is about $23 million. So you can see that that's a big lift. It's going to take a little bit more time to put that one together.
Right, but it's going to be a beautiful spot when it gets built, and it's in a unique area too, and it's partially an old golf course, and it's all around the Vibes baseball stadium there. So it's an interesting. A lot of different stuff coming together in that area.
Oh, it is wonderful because Sand Creek runs through the center of it, which is both a constraint from a building standpoint, but also an opportunity for park users to have a bridge over Sand Creek and to be able to get near the water and appreciate the wildlife habitat that is there. And really, there are a lot of opportunities at Coleman Park, and so we will continue working forward on that one.
Don't get too excited. Not enough water for whitewater rafting.
No, not even close.
Not anywhere near that. This has been a great conversation. We covered a lot of stuff the department did, and stuff moving forward. What else do you have for us? Anything else that I left out that maybe do you want to cover for me, or did I actually really ask all the right questions?
Well, of course you asked the right questions.
Not always.
You've got kind of the inside knowledge of a lot of the things that we do, and I'm sure that we did miss some exciting things and some important things, but I think overall we've covered some of my favorites, at least, maybe 2023's greatest hits.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was looking for, the greatest hits and what's coming up. Well, Britt, thank you for taking the time. I know you're super busy and you had a meeting right before this and you probably got one right after this and you're going to be zooming off to something else. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And, I think it's good that every year we kind of do this and we get people up to date with what's going on, kind of in a little nutshell, instead of having to go look through news archives or anything like that, or look through their Facebook feed and see what's going on. There's kind of a nutshell about it. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.
Okay. Well, Britt, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for listening to the Outdoors with Ike and Bob podcast.